Today we have Michele Torrey with us, and Michele just welcomed us right into the hot topic of who tells the story and why that matters. I have had several people who were podcast guests on historical things in the last couple of years, from the Underground Railroad, which had a hub in my little nowhere New Hampshire town that nobody knew about, and it was
Right.
called Hidden History because the state of New Hampshire 100 years ago erased all history of slavery or slave trafficking or travel through here. And then
Oh,
it became uncovered when they found out there was a slave harbor in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Cool.
yeah.
Then I had somebody from Vietnam talking about her work in humanitarian efforts at the height of the Vietnam War. And the thread that started pulling through is what were women's roles in these resistance
Sure.
movements? Okay. But I never cared about history until now in the United States. History, somebody said it doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And there's
Oh,
some rhyming stories happening right now with what's happening, but it's not happening to just black and brown bodies. And suddenly, the history of slavery that didn't matter to white folks who had their picnics or could look the other way or, well, they must have deserved it,
right,
is now it's time
right,
for a new reveal. And then you
right,
happen in my path.
right. So the way Fox Creek came about for me, and I think this really sets the tone and the foundation for our discussion today. Um, I was, first of all, an author of children's books for ages 8 and up, including middle grade and YA, published through some of the major publishing houses. I had an opportunity to go to New Orleans, and I'd never been to the South before, and I was so excited. And of course, I'm trying to think, how can I make this a YA novel while I'm there, right off the trip, you name it. And I thought, how cool would it be to set a ghost story in New Orleans? So I did some research, and I went there, with prepared. And while I was down there, I thought, well, I also want to go see some plantations because as long as I'm here, that's always been an interest of mine to kind of see about history. And I rented a car and just went up north of Baton Rouge and saw maybe 10 plantations. And I'm a northern girl. So what I actually saw was very unexpected and stunning to me. What I saw were the docents dressed up, some of them, like the antebellum mistresses, giving very drawling, beautiful presentations on the big house, the family who lived there. And not once did they ever mention the slaves. That blew me away. And I was so disturbed by that. Afterward, I would walk through the plantation grounds, visit the slave cabins, and so on, and I was just haunted by this. So yes, I went to New Orleans, and instead of a ghost story, I was haunted by history. I came home absolutely on fire, and I think it's very much like what you were saying, Kim, how you hadn't been interested in necessarily like the slavery or the black oppression until you were confronted with it through kind of the universe saying you need to look at this. And so I did. I spent 3 years in full-time research, and what came out of this was a novel about Fox Creek Plantation,
Mhm.
um, where the novel is told not only through the eyes of the white plantation owners, but through the eyes of the slaves who were part of their family.
Mhm.
And I really wanted to explore that intersection between the white narrative and the slave narrative because I knew the white narrative and how it related to that slave narrative had been exploited by whites and
Mhm.
whitewashed by whites
Mhm.
throughout history. And as I spent those 3 years in research, I uncovered so much and it changed my world. It just rocked my world. I was never the same again after that.
No, no, you can't. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Right.
And that's true whether it's a video of what's happening on the streets or it's the research into something like that. And it's interesting to me the way that when we're just going along on our, bumping along on our little merry way, the universe, the spirit has a way of saying, you need to look at this.
Yes.
And I don't believe it lands on one person. I believe it lands across people, but very few people pick up that thread and say, I'll go.
Right. Right.
Kudos
Something
to you.
interesting happened to me just the other day, and I was at my hairdresser's, and she found out that I had written this book.
Mhm.
She asked me a little bit about it, and she said, "Well, what kinds of things do you talk about on your podcasts, when you're a guest?" And I told her about race relations and my it was like the 30-second, review of race relations, a summary of what you would give to somebody who may or may not be interested in that. And I really expected more follow-up questions, but instead, what happened was she could barely wait for me to put a period at the end of my sentence
Yeah,
before she launched into basically a tirade she lectured me for 10 minutes. And I
yeah,
sat there of her experience with race relations, and it was very, very whitewashed and very white bound. And I knew that it was hopeless to say anything more. And I basically sat there kind of a prisoner because I can't like leave as my hair is being cut. I
oh,
sat
no.
there having
Yeah.
to listen to that. And what I realized through that discussion is this is only the beginning. This is only, I'm just now taking the lid off of what white people have to say about all this. And it's going to be across the board. And a lot of white people just don't want to hear it. So
No.
it does take someone who's ready to listen, who has
Mhm.
that open space inside of them,
Right,
that when they hear something like this, it sparks.
right, right. And I did work with Dr. Nikki Lanier, who's a wonderfully gifted and called Black executive woman in America. And she reached out to white women specifically a couple of years ago because we have position, proximity, and power to policymakers, who are
Absolutely.
the only ones who can change the system that it has become. And it's not personal affront, it's not whatever. But her call was to inclined white women who want to make a difference. I went to this event not even thinking I was inclined. I was curious. I was
Oh,
mildly curious. And
interesting.
it changed the game for me. It's why I started the podcast so that I didn't go back into my defensive white bubble. And I couldn't. And I want that for every person in America now who has said, I'm not racist, I have black friends, or I'm not racist. Because when I deconstructed my whiteness in the last year, I didn't know anything about my story or heritage because I've been whitewashed and brainwashed. But what's happening on the streets now with white people being killed because they are protecting the minority voice,
Mhm.
that's age old in your slavery, in the civil rights movement throughout. So tell us more about what you learned and your aha moments in your research.
Oh gosh, there were many, of course. In 3 years, you're going to read a lot.
Yeah.
Of course, I did the basic research of, the general research of because I live in Washington and have for most of my life, and other than that, I've lived in Europe. So
Mhm.
never in the South. I had to really become not only familiar with, but very comfortable in the Southern setting and the Southern
Mhm.
way of being. And how did I do that? Most of that was done through reading journals and diaries, letters written by white people in the South at that time. So their language, their cadence, their prejudices, and discovering that they weren't all just, one big caricature of the evil plantation owner and the wicked, cruel mistress, whatever that might be. They were the gamut, as people are. from kind to
Mhm.
psychopathic. Um, so everybody in between, of course, and then they're faced with a social institution that says it's okay and acceptable and has always been okay and will always be okay to oppress another race of people
Mhm.
solely based on their race. So reading all of that was eye-opening, absolutely. And I'll give you an example. There were two uh, one was a diary written by, what was his name? He was governor of South Carolina in, I think, 1852 to 1854. His name is escaping re, the Sacred Diaries of, anyway, can't remember his name. He was, in my opinion, just kind of an awful man. And as I read his diary, I was repulsed by him. He's one of those, creepy guys that would be, leering at any woman, white or black. And then because he had slaves, of course, the black women were not safe from him. Even his white nieces, as young as 13, were not safe from him. And he was eventually disgraced in office and was ousted because of his violence to his white
Mhm.
relations, not the black ones, of course.
Right.
Um, and then years later found himself, what in his words, abandoned by everybody who should have rallied around him. And he's sick by this time. His servants really are neglecting him because he doesn't have the strength to do anything else. And yet he writes in his diary, I can't understand this. I have never done anyone wrong as long as I have lived. And he truly believed that. And that statement blew me away. And that's like, okay, this is patriarchy talking. This is the white male at the pinnacle of white maleness, power, you name it. And they have carte blanche to do whatever they want to anybody else, and it's okay. So there was that one. And then the other one was a diary. Well, it wasn't a diary. It was actually a plantation journal written by William Bennett Barrow. It's called Plantation Life in the Florida Parishes, 1843 to 1846. And the Florida parishes at that time were part of Louisiana. So it's
Okay.
just the name that they used. And my book takes place in Louisiana, and it actually takes place in the Florida parishes of Louisiana. Um, Bennett Barrow, he would record every day how things were going on his plantation. And it might be as mundane as the weather, cloudy, a bit brisk, and oh, took my horses out, for a run. And then, so everything's very mundane, planted the cotton, blah, blah, blah. And then every now and then you'd come across this passage that would be, whipped my hoe gang today because for 3 days running, they'd only done a half day's work. And he says that just like he would report the weather. So very mechanical about it all. And in fact, his vision for plantation, and he managed it himself, he did not hire an overseer. His vision for his plantation was one, he likened it to a piece of machinery where if you have all the rules and everybody knows the rules and they know, okay, for this infraction, you're going to get 10 lashes, that everybody will behave and that it's like a piece of machinery. And so that's the way he ran it. Um, but every now and then his anger or his passions would get the better of him and he would do something vile, like he caught a runaway that had run away more than once. And when the hounds caught him, he let them overhaul him.
Mhm.
So he let the hounds have at this guy.
Mhm.
Um, so sometimes it went into absolute total inhumanity,
Mhm.
beyond what his infractions and punishments said he would do. And then he asked his wife one day, am I not a good man? And she looked at him and he writes, she told me with all sincerity, No, I don't believe you've ever harmed anyone. And that again, it was much like this other fellow. It blew me away that they could not see the damage that they were doing to other human beings, that instead they saw how society saw them. And their white friends saw them as really good people, people
Right.
who were fun to be with, who could tell a good joke, who went to fish fries and dances, and who took care of their civic duty, took care of their friends and neighbors if they had trouble. So you have um, this duality of people who are normal, good people,
Mhm.
and yet they do absolute cruelty.
Right.
And I had to investigate that. There's all this gray area, and that's what I'm talking about when it says it ran this gamut of people.
Mhm.
And if we do not identify ourselves as white people with those white people back then and what they perpetrated, then we create this distance between us and them. And we say, but that was them. I would never do anything like that in my life. I would never have owned a slave.
Right.
Then we're not understanding the dynamic, and we allow ourselves then to perpetrate and participate in tiny ways of oppression.
Let's talk about that a little bit more because one of the things I had a historian from the Holocaust, and she talked about how on this beautiful hill there was where the guards would go. They and their families lived on site of the crematoriums where you could see, smell on site, and that was where they went home to after 5 o'clock. And overseeing all of that and having their parties and their rich normal life. And one wealthy woman who was on another hill was disturbed by overseeing the slaughter that was happening at that space. And so she wrote a very well worded letter, like white folk are prone to do, to the one who was running the crematorium, asking them if they could please stop it between the hours of such and such and such and such, her social hours there, so that her guests wouldn't be offended. And of course, that didn't happen either. But that little thread was like, yes, we've all said, oh, I would never, whatever the I would never is. It's kind of like parenting. I would never say that to my child. And then you find yourself doing it. I would never stand by and watch atrocities on our street. And then we not only look the other way, but our defenses are so steeped in ourselves and our generational history of our own of looking the other way and going along to get along and be quiet and don't make waves and don't be associated with the wrong people, that it's almost it's a reflex action. How do we light a spark that the next time that happens they might have a moment of clarity?
Right.
Can you light a spark, or is that divine intervention in the moment?
Well, that you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Right.
So that reminds me of the hairdresser. She had no space in her
Oh,
for me to say anything further about um, my opinions on race.
right.
She shut me down.
Hmm.
And when you encounter people like that, it really, you are wasting your breath. And
Right.
and then you just get into this and it
Mhm.
solves nothing other than to make her more entrenched in
Right.
her stand. Um, it's possible that maybe something I said might light a spark in her, but I don't think she heard a thing I said,
Mhm.
honestly. But there will be people that that believe like she does and might say the same thing she does, but nevertheless it is part of a dialogue
Right.
as opposed to a diatribe.
Yep. Yep.
So when they're willing to dialogue,
Hmm.
I'll dialogue with them.
Hmm. Yep. Right. Yeah. And so when you want an open dialogue like that, can you give us a example, or we can role play if you like? How do white women, because we're so afraid of doing it wrong, saying it
Right,
wrong, being offensive, blah, blah, blah,
right,
blah. How do you have a dialogue where you really, your intent is to listen and learn?
right,
It's not to convince or persuade.
right.
It's
Well,
a seed.
I think what women need to do, first of all, is understand we're not going to be perfect.
Right.
We're going to say things that we realize later, oh, I probably should have said it this way. And that's part of the process and part of, us just being open to the dialogue and to be allowing ourselves to continue to learn. Um, the statement, well, I'm not a racist. I think very few of us actually are racist.
Mhm.
There's and what do we mean by the statement, I'm not a racist? It means we don't hate
Right.
or those of,
Mhm.
other skin tones or religions, whatever it might be. I guess it would be just skin tones,
Mhm.
but we're willing to instead open our hearts to the ways that we have been taught that still oppress another person. And it, like you, I didn't realize how I had been raised like that. And society enforces it. Society raises us that way through schools, through um, other white people, whatever, and we don't even realize that we're doing it. So the way to unpeel all those layers is to be open to being unpeeled. And
Yeah.
so when we're talking to our friends, we may make mistakes, and that's okay. I would say do your best and read books like White Fragility, I think by Kate D. Camillo, something like that,
Mhm.
called White Fragility. She's a white writer talking about her experiences in trying to teach racism and entrenched racism or systemic racism to white people or to workplaces that might have, a couple black people, but mostly white, and the defensiveness that she encountered through those experiences. And she learned, and boy, when I read that book, I thought, oh, I'm guilty of that. Oh, yeah, that too. So just be open to be corrected, be open to not knowing everything. It's okay.
Well, I always tell people the only story that matters is the one we tell ourselves,
Yeah,
because that's the one that our actions spring from. That's the ones
yeah,
that show our heart, the story we tell
yeah,
ourselves. And what this travel has caused me to do is re-examine the stories I was sold, the
yeah,
lies I believed, and then to take what I need and leave the rest, even from my mother's knee,
yes,
and to as my go forward. And what do I want to leave? What legacy? This isn't just a list. This is a legacy for future generations
absolutely.
of, you know, hidden history that is repeating. It's rhyming in front of our very eyes. We don't have to stay silent like we have in the past. We have some options here. When
Yeah.
that first defense comes up in women, it is a defense of their comfort zone. It's just like if you see a woman who's in an abusive marriage and you talk to her about a domestic violence shelter. Honey, if she's not ready to hear that, you just became the problem, not the husband, not the.
Mhm.
So with people, I like to deal in stories. I like to deal in live narratives. It's why, and I don't read nonfiction, but your book calls my name because of who you are behind it. And because who tells that story makes an impact on who can listen to that story. If there's a black writer out there and those books are sold in black bookstores, the likelihood of getting through to that little hairdresser of yours is now, not ever, never.
Right, right.
But if someone who looked like her, sounded like her, moved in her circles, read it and said, "Wow, this one part was really, really made me think."
Hmm.
Well, now we're not talking about you and your racism or me and my white saviorism. We're talking about this little thing that made me remember something about my life and look at it differently.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I
Excellent.
suspect that the way your book is written probably has a lot of opportunity for readers to reflect.
Yeah, and I was very careful as I wrote this book that I did not want to overlay the author judgment on any of my characters, no matter what they were like. And I tried to write almost all of my characters in shades of gray, right?
Uh-huh.
No one is overtly this and no one is overtly that.
Yeah.
Because that, for me, that's a turnoff. I find that too simple.
Mhm.
Life's just not that way, and people aren't that way.
Right.
So I was very careful as I wrote this to not burden the reader with my judgment. And
Yeah.
yet, that really poses some uncomfortable spaces for the reader because now the reader has to try to figure out on their own, well, how do I feel about this person?
What
Who
does that
is this
mean?
person?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, yeah.
What?
So, I wanted to pick up on something that occurred to me while you were speaking, and that is, in the recent Black Lives Matter, one of the responses to Black Lives Matter by white people was all lives matter. And
Yeah.
I remember the first time I heard that, I thought, well, yeah, all lives do matter. And then, like, I pondered that a little bit and I thought, but that kind of bothers me. And I'm not sure why that bothers me. And then later I was in a discussion with a white couple who are dear friends of mine. And they said they don't like this Black Lives Matter movement. They think all lives matter.
Mhm.
And I spoke up and I started to talk, and yet I couldn't articulate why all lives matter bothered me. I
Mhm.
wasn't there yet. I couldn't articulate it. And so I just kind of fumbled around. And that's what I'm saying is sometimes we just have to jump in and we may not have the words. We may not be there yet. But it was only later after trying that I was able to articulate it with myself. And so here goes. So
Okay.
fundamentally, in truth, all lives matter. And in
Yes.
my opinion, all lives are one. We're one.
Mhm. Yeah.
We're connected.
Mhm.
That light in me is connected to that light in you.
Yeah.
But the problem with white people saying all lives matter in response to Black people saying Black lives matter is we have always told them their lives don't matter.
Right.
That has been our narrative from
Yeah.
the very beginning.
Yes.
And they're trying to say, after the killing of George Floyd,
Mhm.
our lives matter. And we're saying, mm-mm, nope, 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 all lives matter. Sorry, all lives matter.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
I was finally able to get there. So, but if I hadn't talked to my friends, I'm not sure I would have been able to parse that out in my head. So anyway, it's good for you. Try,
Well,
jump in.
and what I do now is I help women find their voice
Yeah.
because the growth really comes in doing exactly that. It's not about making them think. It's about hearing you say out loud around other white folk, I am not comfortable with that. And I don't know why, but it's not sitting right with me. And the minute you say that one thing, your inner child, your spirit, your soul goes, yes,
Hmm.
somebody sees me.
Hmm.
Somebody's listening.
Hmm.
Okay. And then you can practice some more. And
Right.
as you hear yourself and you learn, your voice gets stronger, you become more confident. Certainly, that's what's happened here with me on One Voice Evolving. This conversation would not have happened 2 seasons ago.
Nor
I
with
was
me,
not
nor with
ready.
me.
I
I
was
was
still
I was
busy
frightened.
coding, right? Yeah.
Hmm. And I was frightened because with, the cultural appropriation, you know, I finished this book back in 2008, and yet I didn't get it out there until 2 years ago. Well, actually, it was only published just recently, but I wasn't comfortable enough with even thinking I want it out there because I was terrified. Here
Yep.
is a white woman who is talking through the voices of Black people, and I am going to get, as one friend put it, you are going to get crucified. And
Right.
I thought, and so I just sat in absolute mortification of fear. I will get crucified. How do I do this?
Right.
And so I finally realized, I'm not trying to suppress Black voices. In fact,
Mhm.
I want to raise Black voices. I want to start the dialogue. I want to
I
be
love
a part of the dialogue, and my voice is vital to that dialogue. And in fact, it reminds me of I was listening to a wonderful Black woman, Harvard professor. Her name's Irene Monroe. She's from Boston. She has a radio show there. And I was in one of her lectures, and she told me that to heal, well, she said that to heal race relations in the United States, white people have to stop being afraid of talking about it. We
Yeah.
have to talk about it. We
Yeah.
have to just get out there and not be afraid of saying the wrong thing. She says, unless we talk about it, the, what we're saying wrong will continue to be locked in our heads,
Right.
you know.
Right. And
Um,
that fear
yeah,
factor is
yeah.
real. It's why women don't podcast because they're afraid of haters or trolls. Kept me
Right.
off. People told me for 10 years I should podcast before this finally moved me because of that. And that whole, I always say, we don't move until the pain of where we are is greater than the fear of where we're going. And in my trajectory, the pain of staying silent in the face of what was happening became greater than what are they going to do to me if I speak up?
Yeah.
What are they going to do? The beauty about being in my age group is I have fewer F's to give, and a life sentence doesn't mean all that much anymore. Okay.
Right, exactly. And that's the decision I came to as well. And I thought, well, if there's haters out there, you're not going to do anything about that.
Right.
And you're going to speak though to a swath of the population that needs to hear what you have to say. And that's why I'm here on this planet.
Yeah, there you go. Purpose, passion, and power all
Yeah,
intersect
yeah,
right
yeah.
there. Yeah. And so you decided to publish, and what has been your experience since then?
It's been amazing. It's been amazing, but I think um I don't know if 2 years ago or let's say 4 years ago, that I would have been ready to have this conversation. I really had to watch kind of our country unfold with its racial dynamic to
Yeah.
realize how vital it was that my voice be heard. Um, yeah, so I think it just came to that point, like you said, the pain
Mhm.
was too great for me to stay silent.
Mhm. You were born for a time such as this.
Yeah, yeah,
Where do
exactly.
people find your work? Where do they find you?
Well, in the usual places like
Uh-huh.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, again, it's called Fox Creek.
Yeah.
Also, bookshop.org,
Hmm.
.org, not .com, and that will support your local bookstore.
Oh, nice.
And it's in other places like Kobo, Apple Books, and so on.
Mhm.
And then I do have a website, metorrey.com, and you
Mhm.
can read more about me and my journey. And there's media packet on there too, other
Oh,
podcasts,
good.
etc.
Okay. And so are you doing speaking? Are you taking your show on the road?
I am trying not to because I was in the children's publishing industry for 20 years
Yep.
and did everything that my publishers told me to do and ran myself exhausted, absolutely exhausted. um, Traveling, you name it, doing book signings, doing speaking engagements and school visits across the country. I was exhausted. Well, in this virtual day and age, I don't feel like I necessarily need to do that. Although, if I was invited to something really special that involved travel,
Mhm.
I wouldn't count that out.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. I love that.
Yeah.
I just had an idea of a question I wanted to ask you, and now I've forgotten what it was. So,
Welcome to my world.
I know, right? Oh, that is. It's our world. That's what I wanted to talk about. So
Universe.
one of the themes in our podcast from the beginning is reclaiming joy and diversity
Oh,
because it's a heavy topic and it's a hard carry and it's a heavy load. And but in this time, when you sit on something for 10 or 12 years that you've already researched, you've already written, but you didn't have the confidence, the courage, it wasn't time, whatever it is to get it out there. More and more women. I saw a thing about how many old white women are protesting in this country. And
yes.
it's like, yes, honey, there is rage rising in the feminine perspective. And those voices that you counted out because of a certain age. And I say, this is not your mama's menopause. And this is not your mama's message either.
Yeah.
And that what we've learned from our lives of giving it away until there's nothing left to give for the success of a publisher or a corporation or a family or a man, all of that gets to go by the wayside in menopause. And then we get to say, so who am I? And what's my rhythm and my joy and my place in the world? What do I want to leave behind? Because they will remember your name. It won't be just Mrs. Somebody like it was 150 years ago in history.
Yes. And I've been introduced before as Carl's wife. This is Carl Gann and his wife. I'll never forget that one. That was at a church. We were made to stand up as the newcomers, and they
Aha.
didn't bother to learn my name.
I
Yeah, don't
Whole
do
other kind of
that.
deconstruction. Yeah, that's a book for another day.
Yeah.
So how do you finding your rhythm? It's really just finding your no muscle, isn't it? It's
Well, first of all, it's recognizing what's not serving you.
There you go.
Okay. And when I was 20 years in that industry, I had started that children's career with total joy,
Yeah.
absolute joy, because in my heart,
Mhm,
in my creative spirit, I was born a writer.
mhm.
And I feel the universe directing my writing. And yet, when it came under the fist of giant publishers who wanted me to make them money,
Right.
um, and I had giant expectations on my shoulders, I became very despondent. And I was under contract for two series at the same time from two different publishers. And those series, the contracts for those overlapped. So I've got these two books due, these ones, the manuscript is coming in for copy editing, whatever. Everything was happening all at the same time. I didn't have time for anything. And I was very unhappy doing that.
Mhm.
Um, I couldn't figure why I was unhappy. It took me a long time to figure it out because in my head I was thinking, but this is writing. This is what you always wanted. And it was a long time before I realized, but not this, not this.
Yeah.
And to remember that the happiest I ever was when I was writing and no one had any expectations.
Mhm.
That was my happiest. So what happened was I ended up kind of phasing out of my writing just slowly. When the last book was published, I decided I'm just going to take a sabbatical that turned into years.
Yep.
And during that sabbatical, I actually co-founded an organization called Orphans Africa.
Okay.
And it's a charity, and we're still working, we're still doing it. We build schools for orphan children in Tanzania. And we have 6 campuses, ages 2 through 21. And we have educated thousands of children who otherwise would have died. They would have been on the streets, or they would have just been field laborers for the rest of their lives. And
Mhm.
yet now we've had children become doctors, policemen, nurses, teachers, parliament members, just uh, entrepreneurs, secretaries, you name it. And we've given children a chance to prove their potential.
Mhm.
And that was where my spirit was leading me when I was so despondent with the writing. I thought, this is not serving me anymore, nor the world. What's next? And so this starting of that charity was what was next. And we worked and work in some of the poorest parts of Tanzania, where even now it would, if we hadn't been there, it would be like it was 150 years ago,
Mhm.
where they had no clean water, no electricity, no nothing.
Right.
And we've changed not only the lives of these children, but the lives of the community. We've given everyone hope there, and we're going towards self-sustainability so that at some point, hopefully in the next few years, we're done. We step back and we say, okay, foreign money is finished, and we have taught you enough, and you have enough self-sustaining money earning projects that you can do yourselves, that you no longer need us. You have realized your own potential. Carry it on from here. And they are ready. They're ready
Right.
to go. We just need a few more projects to mature,
Mhm.
and they're ready to cut loose.
Mhm. It is.
So, Fox Creek, the writing of that coincided with the genesis of the charity, and it was part of me ah, coming out of my white privilege and giving back to the world and helping to even this playing field that has been wrong and off balance for so long.
I often look at white women and I think of the Dead Sea, and here's why. We love to learn, ever learning and never coming to a knowledge of the truth. You'll find them after a George Floyd in every book study, every little circle, every little everything they can get their hands on, or throwing money at something. But until it becomes your embodied expression, whether it comes out in nonprofit or in art or in writing or in speaking, that's when that changed life becomes a light in the world.
Absolutely.
That's
And then
what we're
that
after.
light speaks to others. Yes.
Exactly. Exactly. From the inside out. And so when I look at the Dead Sea and how nothing can grow there, it's not because it's not getting rained on. It's not because there's no seeds there. It's not because there couldn't be. It's because there's no outlet. And so it's stagnant and nothing can live where there's no outlet.
Yeah.
And when I look at women in over the centuries of history and the quelching that has happened,
Mm,
the go along to get along to save your skin at the cost of somebody else's.
mhm.
Dead Sea.
Right, right,
So
right.
God bless you. God
Thank you.
bless you for
Thank you
sharing this
much.
space with us like
Thank
this.
you. Thank you.
Is there anything else you can think that you'd like to add or speak to
Sure.
us before we
Sure.
go?
There is, as you were speaking that, there is one story that, is about speaking our truth and finding our truth. I went to seminary back in the early aughts, along with all these contracts. So I really was a busy lady. Um, and one of my co-students during that seminary program, very, very learned person. I mean, this person had read every book imaginable. You imagine that big library in the sky. Well, he had read them all. Um, and then he he kept searching for like life's meaning. And he kept reading, kept reading, kept reading. And finally, an experience happened to him where he realized that until he put his books away and turned within and looked and listened, he would never find it. And he finally did that, and something opened in him. and he was finally able to hear this great truth that was waiting for.
Mm.
And I know that spoke to other people in my seminary. That was such a deep, deep truth. And that speaks kind of to your analogy of the Dead Sea.
Mhm.
Um, it's we can put so much in, but until we make space for it in here, we open it up. That truth is in us. It's always been in us. And as being one, being joined, we can connect with that truth, but we have to open that space to let it in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we shall.
Yeah.
And so we shall. Thank you, Michele, for your time today. I
Thank you.
appreciate you so much.